Hey, what's going on, you guys? It's your boy 3 Stacks in this thing, baby. And today I'm coming at you with an update for my True Draco pure list. Now, I think this deck has really good potential for this format. It's already solidified itself as a pretty much a dominant tier 2 deck that has the ability to tank and hang with the top dogs, the tier 1 decks. And now with the ban list in effect and this looking like it's gonna be a more control-oriented format, I think Dracos would be an ideal choice if you were to pick up a cheap budget deck that you still wanted to do really well with and nab some wins in top events. I think that Draco's a good choice because it arguably has one of the best Sky Striker matchups. And while some can argue to say it could sway either way because of a card like Jamming Waves, honestly, Draco has more ways to deal with Sky Strikers than Sky Strikers have to deal with Dracos. And I think the fact that they can play Floodgates comfortably like Anti-Spell and Goes In and Rivalry, Monarchs Erupt, and etc. so on and so forth, and the ability to pop their back rows and just really grind for a long time. I think Dracos have an amazing Sky Striker matchup, an amazing Altergeist matchup, an incredible Thunder Dragon matchup because they're not automatically losing to Colossus. And the fact that Apocalypse really just helps you to deal with any established board is insane. It's just a really strong deck that can afford to go first or second and play very comfortably whether you lose or win the dice roll. So I do think it's a great deck and you should definitely try it out this format. With that out the way, before we start the profile, I just want to notify you in case you are unaware that I am hosting a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament tomorrow. I've been talking about this for about 2 weeks now. I've been saying it ahead of time, but I am hosting it tomorrow. Tomorrow afternoon. The address, if you're interested, it is a cash prize available. It will be $50 per increment of 10. So for every 10 people that shows up, that's $50 more towards the cash prize. So if, let's say, for example, 20 people show up, that's $100 that somebody's going to walk out with. In addition to that, we're still going to have fun. There's free food, there's free drinks, there's free alcohol. I might end up giving away a mat or two. I might end up giving away a card depending on, how it goes with topping. But if you're interested, the address is 200 Hollow Tree Lane, HOLLOWTREE Lane, LN, Houston, Texas, zip code 77090. The time is going to be around afternoon, anywhere between 1 and, 2 or 3. Also, if you are curious about where to park, hit me up on Facebook, IVINDIXON, Facebook, Ivan Dixon. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and hit me up. I'll let you know where to park, and we're just going to have a blast. So if you're interested in coming, definitely come down and support the cause. If you want to enter to the tournament, it's $15 entry fee. There will be a cash prize, and depending on how many people, there will end up being a cash prize for first, second, and third place. But if we don't get enough people, there won't be enough to go around. But if you're interested, I just wanted to let you know. Without out the way, we're going to hop into the deck profile. So we're going to start off with our monsters. We're rocking 3 copies of Majesty Maiden. I think that she's a really great card, and I know that people go back and forth on playing 2 and 3 of her, but I think it's ideal to maximize on a card like this because Ignis, Heat, and Knuckles do not get you other Dracos so that you can disrupt your opponent more by tributing on your opponent's turn. But with Maiden and the fact that she's not once per turn, she can allow you to pump out more Dracos excessively so that way you have the ability to OTK on the follow-up, which is really imperative when you're playing against decks that have this point where they start snowballing out of control. Like a deck like Altergeist and Sky Strikers, there's a point in those matchups where you don't want to hit. And because of that, and because Dracos are a control deck, you need to maximize on a card like Maiden so that she can allow you to establish a more vulnerable field presence to give you the accumulative damage that you need for an OTK, which is really important. So I think as far as pressure goes, Maiden can be more optimal in certain scenarios than Ignis Heat or Knuckles can. But I'm not saying that she's a better card than either one of them. I'm just saying that in more scenarios, for me personally, in my experience, she's been a better card than them. But I'm not saying that she's a better card than them. So we're rocking 3 of her. We're also playing 2 copies of Ignis Heat because I unfortunately only have 2 copies. It doesn't change the fact that I would play 3 if I had 3 though, because he's a really good card. And it's ideal to deal with back rows before you even commit to your more powerful plays. Like Dracos are a deck full of power spells. And you want your power spells to resolve, but also at the same time, you want to clear out back rows and monsters that could be in your way because your Draco monsters don't necessarily have the ability to pop monsters. They use the spells and traps of this archetype to your advantage so that way you can deal with it. So Ignis Heat is a really good card going second. And ideally, if I open up with a powerful spell like Desire's Demise or even Duality, if I have the means to normal summon a card like Ignis, I would normal summon him first and then play one of those cards. So if my opponent has a response, like a hand trap or anything that will stop it, I can chain Ignis and I can get out one of my spells so that I can get an extra normal summon, and that way I can continue with my plays. So he's really good, not to mention that all the spells can pop spells or traps on the field, and their effects when they're sent to the graveyard is not once per turn. So you can easily crack Sky Striker boards and Altergeist boards easily going second with this deck. And Apocalypse allows you to grind against some of the best decks because it can half your opponent's monsters attack and defense. But ideally, Ignis is a really good card, and I definitely would play 3 if I had 3. Next up, we have the Lone Wolf, 1 Dynamite Knight, the true Draco fighter, which is what we call Clay Matthews or Knuckles. Now, this card is honestly one of the best ones, and some argue to say that it actually is the best of all the Draco monsters, and for very good reason. This card gives you access to the best of the Draco archetype main deck spells and traps, which is your Apocalypse and your Return. Those cards allow you to grind and get you further in a lot of matchups versus Heritage and True Draco Disciples. Because don't get me wrong, popping back rows is really good, but one thing that every deck has to play to win the game is monsters. And the ability to have your opponent's monsters whenever you feel fit, or to get an extension to your plays by reborning one of your Dracos so that you can then either tribute it or have more damage on board. And also just basically being able to pop any of your opponent's monsters by tributing the trap that he gives you a key element that you really need to control the game. So cards like Ignis Heat and Draco and Knuckles are what you're fetching off of your Maiden. So she gets you quicker access to these, because once you get these on board, if you have a Maiden, and Ignis Heat, and a Knuckles, you have extreme control over the board, being able to search out a spell and a trap, and you can easily tribute one or the other so that you can pop the ideal card that would be in your way so that you can steamroll your opponent and head straight to victory. So this card is really amazing, and he actually is like so good in every situation, whereas these aren't always going to be good. He's like super great in basically every situation, and he's the most ideal Draco that you want to end on. The highest attack value and the ability to have monsters attack and defense so that you can continue to beat over any monsters that you see fit. So this is really, really nice. Now, a card like Amano Awato can be played in this deck, and I have experimented with that card for over a year. It's been a really, really good card for me personally, but because I have Sky Strikers in mind, which is arguably the best deck of the format, it's just we can't deny it. And also the fact like a card like Infinite Impermanence does exist, Amano Iwato is not going to be as great as you want him to be, and he's ideal for going first because he can potentially stop your opponent from hand trapping you, but also at the same time going second, he really does struggle. And because he's not always good going first and second, is the reason why I just decided to cut him, because he can be situational, and sometimes he just clumps my hands up. I just felt that only monsters that I wanted to play were the true Draco monsters, and that's it. And ideally, this deck can play through any hand trap except for a Droll and Lockbird, because if you're Drolled at the right time, you'll be left with all these cards that can still search you more cards, but you can't search. But even so, with that in mind, Droll and Lockbird is not very popular this format, because the decks that are dominating currently right now, which are going to be the top dogs, which is the Dark Warrior / Danger deck, which doesn't really lose to Droll like people think it does. Then you have Altergeist, which literally Droll does nothing to. Thunder Dragons, which Droll and Lockbird does nothing to. And then Sky Strikers, which Droll can hurt in certain scenarios, but they can easily play around it because the deck has access to everything at 3. And the ability to still add their spells back with Kagari really helps them out a lot. And the fact that they can easily just attack with Hayate, send a spell, and add it with Kagari can easily play around Droll by dumping a spell and adding it from grave to hand. So Droll, even though it's a hand trap that you could, basically that could be a reason for playing Amano Iwato, that reason alone wasn't enough for me to consider playing Amano Iwato in the main deck. It's a good side deck card for specific matchups. But ideally, I just felt that I wanted to main deck only consistency cards. I wanted every spell or trap or monster in my deck to get me more accumulative card advantage so that I can continue going on my plus train. Now for our spells, we're going to start off with 3 copies of Dragonic Diagram. The best field spell, probably of 2017, I would say. Like, out of all the sets that came out, Maximum Crisis printed one of the best field spells of that year. Dragonic Diagram is a very iconic field spell. It's incredible, in fact, and it's one of the main reasons why this deck can go second so easily. And it's really good bait for Ash Blossom and Ghost Ogre, which I really do love a lot, because this card easily allows you to basically it not only searches through your deck, but it lets you know what hand traps your opponent have, because this card in this deck is ideal for any Draco player. So the opponent seeing that you have a diagram, they obviously don't want that card to resolve because it has access to everything that you need in your deck, and nobody wants you to get what you want, right? That's just how Yu-Gi-Oh works. So this card kind of acts in a way as a way for me to procure information that's necessary so that I can continue going through with my plays, knowing what and when to do certain things. So I really like Diagram. It's a great card. It helps you going second. Breaks boards. It searches out all your combo pieces, and it's not once per turn. Then we have 2 copies of Optimus Prime because the card is at 2. And I also play another field spell, which has always been my secret tech since I've started playing Pure True Dracos. Even when Masterpiece was at 3, I always played Domain of the True Monarchs. I felt that this deck plays one of the best domain locks because it has the ability to basically summon more tribute summonable monsters even if the first one gets outed. Because the ideal way to get out of the domain lock is arguably your opponent either pops this or they pop your monster or get rid of your tribute summon monster. And people are prone to have more main deck monster removal than they are to have spell or trap removal. So if your opponent ever was to kill your Draco monster, you could easily tribute summon for another one and keep them under the domain lock, which is why I like this card. It gives me another target for my terraforming and another ability for me to floodgate my opponent. Ideally, if you open with a Gozen or a Rivalry plus a Monarchs Erupt or even like an anti-spell if you play that, and you have this, you have a very high ceiling in practically any matchup because you're denying them the right to go into their extra deck, which is the equivalent of a U-Link without the protection of Nightmare monsters. But it's even better for you because of the fact that this card doesn't hurt you if they kill it. You can still play Dracos the way that you want to anyways. This is like icing on a cake and a way to increase your ceiling exponentially just by playing it. So if you're not playing this in a Draco deck, you better be playing Winter Cherries and have an extra deck. That should be your only excuse for not playing this card. It's really good, and it'll win you your Sky Striker matchup, your Thunder Dragon matchup, your Goki matchup. As long as they don't open with an out to it, you're pretty much secure for that duel. Alright, so now we're going to move forward to the True Draco spells and traps, which we basically play 3 of each because they're ideal. We have 3 copies of Heritage because Heritage is, in a way, it's normally like a Demise or a Desires whenever you resolve it. I never resolve it to draw 1. I always draw 2 off of this card because I'm not trying to play like Saki in a way, and I'm not trying to like play the risk of not drawing the right card. Like for me, if I'm committing for a Heritage play, it's gonna be a plus no matter what. So I'm either Heritaging for 2 or for 3. I don't ever Heritage for 1. Unless I'm just truly desperate and there's no other play that I can make. But Heritage is another way for you to accumulate card advantage. That's why this deck's so consistent, because it has all this draw power, which gives it a really high ceiling in a Thunder Dragon matchup, because Colossus only denies you your Diagram and your terraforming searches and basically Maiden. But your Ignis Seed and Knuckles can still play the cards onto the field. So it really doesn't lose to Colossus like some people would think it would. But anyways, 3 Heritage. And obviously you're popping back rows with this card as well, getting your extra tribute summons. Next up, we have 3 Disciple of the True Draco Phoenix. This card allows you to stay in the game, especially when you've resolved a card like Pot of Desires and you're running low on copies of specific cards. Ideally, I would never resolve Desires until I've gotten this guy out of my deck because I can't really afford to play without him. He's just really good and helps me grind for a very long time. But ideally, you can play with only 2 or 3 monsters because of Draco Phoenix and the fact that you can use it on itself and keep access to all of your cards at any given time and keep you from decking out also, which really does come up because this deck does draw a ton. And this card draws as well, and it pops back rows and it recycles, so it's a really good card. So next up for our power cards, we're going to start off with 3 copies of Card of Demise. Now, this deck arguably plays Demise better than most, but there are some decks that can play Demise a little bit better. It's just the fact that you can filter through your hand with the card like Dragonic Diagram and kind of clear out the monsters that you have in your hand and pop them, trade them out for cards that you could set. And you can play your field spell, which gets another card out of your hand and allows you to commit more to the board so that when you draw off of Demise, you'll be able to use every card and not have to discard them because your back row's too full or you have too many monsters. So it's really good in this deck, honestly. And a lot of times, you'll play through a Ghost Ogre and an Ash Blossom. And after that, you'll just activate Demise. And you just get so far ahead that the fact that they ogred your Diagram and then Ash your Terraforming wouldn't even matter. Like, it just... Demise is kind of in a way that you can play through hand traps. It's really good because it gives you back the resources that you lost when your opponent used the hand traps on you. Then we have 3 copies of Desires. Now, I find that I know some people go back and forth and argue over what's correct to play, but as far as ratios go, for me, I wouldn't cut a consistency card from my deck at the fear that I can draw 1 or too many of it. Because in my mind, I need to draw the card. I need to draw cards like this because I want to get so far ahead of my opponent that there should not be any way for them to out-resource me. And Draco's is a really strong deck with out-resourcing your opponent for the simple fact that not only do you have all this draw power and the ability to thin your deck and search a lot, but your Draco monsters, every time your opponent activates a card, you net a piece of advantage on top of whatever they're playing, so you really can out-resource even a Sky Striker deck, which is actually insane because that deck's best way to win is just by weathering down your opponent and overcoming in sheer terms of card economy. So Desires is really ideal for me because I want to be ahead of my opponent at all times, so I need to draw power cards like this. And ideally, it's one of the best spells of the deck, and the fear of drawing 3-ups that you can search off of other 3-ups is irrelevant to me because if you play this card adequately, you won't banish the cards that you need. Next up, because I'm going all gas and no brakes, I'll also play 3 copies of Into the Void. I wanted to maximize on every way possible that I can get to my combo pieces because ideally for me, I want more than 1 Floodgate and I want more than 1 Draco monster at all times. Because I'm trying to commit that much to my board, I need to draw excessive amounts of cards because every Draco monster has to be tributed through a spell or trap. So that's 2 cards out of your hand just to summon 1. And then getting access to your Floodgates, you need to dig into your deck because they're not searchable. So for me, draw power in the form of Into the Void, which also complements in unison with your Demise, is actually perfect for me, especially because under Demise, you're going to have to discard all your cards anyways, and you're setting all your spells or traps, so it has no drawback. This is playing 3 Upstart Goblins without the basically drawback of giving your opponent 1,000. And that's my mindset on this card, so no one can really change my mind on that. Next up, I also played 3 copies of Pot of Duality. You really need to maximize on all of your consistency cards when you're playing a deck like Draco's, because even though it's really good, believe it or not, speaking from me with the experience of this deck or coming from anybody who has experience with this deck, they know that this deck can brick sometimes, which really sucks. Even though it has all these draw cards, which is crazy. It really can. And because of that, knowing that that's one of the weaknesses that can occur, either drawing too many Draco monsters or drawing the spells and traps with no monsters, you need to maximize on your consistency cards. The cards that allow you to see other cards in your deck that are not searchable. Anything that's true Draco related is searchable through a card like Diagram, and your monsters can get you access to that. But other cards like your Floodgates, your powerful draw spells like Demise and Desires, and, you know, stuff like Monarchs Erupt is not searchable. So Duality is another way that you can get access to those cards. And also, you're in a situation sometimes where you need a better card to pop with your Diagram. For example, ideally, every Diagram, you want to pop a true Draco spell or trap when you're searching with it. So you can set up for cards like Disciples and Heritage so that you can still get more value out of that play versus just popping an excess spell in your hand that you don't need. So Duality is just really ideal, and I like it a lot. So that's it for your spells. You really want to maximize on every consistency card. And basically, every spell in my deck does exactly what I want it to do, which is thin my deck out for the specific cards that I need that I know I cannot search. And speaking of cards that you cannot search, I'm playing 3 Monarchs Erupt. I find that this is superior to Winter Cherries, regardless of what someone would tell me in the comment section below. Nobody can change my mind on how good of a card Monarchs Erupt is. And for the fact that you have to choose this over Winter Cherries, I would choose this every single time because Winter Cherries is not ideal in every single matchup. But no matter what matchup it is, every deck needs access to their monster effects regardless of what deck it is. Be it Sky Strikers, Thunder Dragons, Altergeist, DDDs, Herald of Perfection, the Draco matchup, Gold Keys, any deck. You need monster effects to resolve. I mean, heck, unless you're playing Exodia, you just really need your monster effects. And with that in mind, I felt that this has a higher ceiling in any matchup, whereas Winter Cherries might be good in certain matchups, but there's some decks that don't lose to Winter Cherries. Like, Sky Strikers don't really lose if you cherries their Kagari. Altergeist don't really lose if you cherries their Hexia. Heck, they can play without it. I've seen it happen. And Thunder Dragons, you can't cherries them. Like, this is the ideal card, and I feel it's correct to play this over cherries. It's an insane Floodgate, and I normally want this backed up with the Gozen. That's ideal for me. Next up, speaking of, we play 2 Gozins and 2 Rivalry of the Warlords. Now, Rivalry is easier to play under because all your monsters are Worm, whereas Gozin locks you to one specific Draco monster. But also keep in mind that any Floodgate you have on your field can easily be dealt with just through the effect of Diagram or even the spells and traps of your Dracos, because you could, arguably, you could use Apocalypse to pop a Heritage or Disciples to have your opponent's board, and then use the Heritage or Disciples to pop this if it's getting in your way and you need to summon more monsters so that you can kill your opponent in the same turn. So Floodgates that are restrictive don't actually pose a hindrance on a true Draco deck because it has the ability to deal with that and get rid of them whenever it's done with them. And next up, we play 3 copies of Apocalypse and 1 copy of Return. Apocalypse is actually insane. It really helps you even against the most unbreakable boards. If you can make it to where their monsters cannot attack over your Knuckles and your Maiden and your Ignis, you're going to be really far ahead in that matchup, because no matter how many times your opponent takes them and turns them into more Link monsters, every turn you'll be able to wither them down with an Apocalypse. Apocalypse is the ultimate grind guard, the grind game card in this deck, and arguably, in my opinion, it's probably the 2nd best Draco card in the archetype for the simple fact that it wins games literally. And Return is good too, but I feel that Apocalypse, even when Return was at 3, Apocalypse was always a better card to me, just in my opinion. But they're still really good cards, you know, don't get me wrong. And next up, I also play 2 Waterfall of the Dragon Souls. Now, Waterfall obviously is a really good card in this deck. It kind of allows you to play 2 more copies of like any Draco monster you need without conflicting with Demise and stuff like that. In addition to that, you can plus really heavy off of this, which is pretty insane. Especially like when you're searching a lot off of Maiden, Ignis, and Knuckles, you can easily sack a couple of them off, get even more resources, and you're so far ahead of your opponent at that point that it doesn't matter if they break your board, because you can easily reestablish with all the excess resources that you have access to. So it's a great card, and if you ever are in a situation where you have the traps but not the monsters, this will fix and alleviate that particular scenario. And as far as anti-spells go, because anti-spell, in my opinion, is only really good against the Sky Striker matchup, and although it is dominant, and you'll see a lot of it, I felt that it'd be a better side deck card than a main deck card, and that's just my opinion. You can easily cut these right here for anti-spells, but for me, I just felt combo pieces over cards like that. I want to help myself more than I want to hurt my opponent, because by helping myself, I'm already fulfilling that other side of it, because Dracos played best can already pose a hindrance against the best decks. And with that said, that is my deck profile. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Went pretty in-depth, but those are my honest opinion and thoughts on Dracos as a deck. And if you're interested in my tournament tomorrow, I would love for you guys to come out and support the cause. I want so badly for the community to get together. I want to meet you guys, get to know you better, see your face, shake your hand, play a children's card game with you, and get a better friendship established between us. That's something that I really want to do. So I hope that you guys can make it. I really pray to God that you can. And if you're coming tomorrow, I will see you tomorrow. But with that said, God bless you guys. Make good choices. Don't hurt your brain cells. Stay tuned for future content. You folks be positive, all right? And peace.